Thanks for joining us. This is the WWH show. Today in our studio, I have a privilege to talk to Robin Pace. She is an author and member of Maryland Writers Association. She is the author of Out of Time. She is a consultant for NIH and many universities in the DC metro area. Her company is Words Work. We're going to talk about why storytelling is powerful. Thank you very much for coming, Robin.
Thanks, Assegid. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're going to talk about storytelling. So let's talk about first, why is storytelling powerful?
Well, I believe, and this is just not my belief, but people like Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Power of Myth, and many, many other more smarter people than me, believe that story is really sort of primal to us as people. We've been telling stories since the days of prehistory around the campfire. Exactly. And we paint them too. You know, there are cave artists from thousands of years ago who, before we even know that there was language, we know that they were communicating. So you can communicate in many ways. We know drummers. The power of music and percussion to communicate things. So it's not just with words that we tell stories. It's in many different forms and shapes, and we've been doing it since humans have been on this earth, I believe.
Yeah, storytelling, I have been reading about storytelling, and myself, I have been practicing about storytelling. I'm a trainer and a consultant, and I have seen the power of story. Rather than me standing on the stage and talking about a topic, giving facts, maybe data, and so on, it's better if I tell maybe a very short story that may stick with my audience. So I have seen the power of storytelling in my job, as a trainer, as a consultant, and a coach. And also I have seen that many successful leaders, community leaders, business owners, and companies, they use storytelling, for example, to share about their success or to clarify their brand and so on and so forth. Have you witnessed that kind of using stories, for example, to companies, leaders?
When I do consulting for NIH clients, for example, a lot of them are scientists. And in fact, I did a training for this at the Smithsonian about a year and a half ago to scientists at the Museum of Natural History there. They have lots of exciting things to share that are relevant to all of us, to us sitting here today. A lot of new discoveries in brain science, for example, is one of the things that I've focused on quite a bit in my work with scientists. And they don't know how, because they don't know how to make their data and their findings relatable to us. And so part of what I do professionally is I help them with metaphor. I help them tell the story, not just of what these numbers say, and not just to use the technical words that they are sort of steeped in, but to speak in plain language so that you and I can understand what.
Yeah, especially for average people, if they talk about some latest scientific discoveries, data, numbers, and so on, they don't stick. People want to know what it means to them, and you can do that only by sharing stories. And also, I have seen that many successful activists, they use storytelling to inspire people, to bring them out and support their causes. And also people use stories of people who are disprivileged or people who are marginalized and so on. They use stories to touch people's hearts. So a story has power to touch hearts.
That's right. If you think of Nelson Mandela, for example, he was a man whose story touched many people and changed the course of a whole nation.
Exactly.
So that's just one, common example that we can relate to today, and that can happen everywhere. I mean, the Arab Spring a couple of years ago started that story, that reform was in the air, that people could make a difference, that dictators could not oppress people, and then that spread.
Exactly.
On the way to meet with you today, I heard a BBC reporter talking about an attempt in China, what they were trying to call the Jasmine Spring. Okay. I'm not sure that it really emerged
I never heard about
was intended, but this was really, again, the idea that the people had things to say, and instead of being oppressed and listen to the old story of what their leaders were telling them was true, they were trying to bring a new truth to light, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah. The challenge, however, is that in the old days, in our history, stories have been considered as part of humanity. For example, there is a quote from Robert Redford. He said that storytelling is important, part of human continuity. But it looks like in the 21st century, people have become very busy and our life become fast-paced, and people don't take time to tell stories, or people don't take time to listen to stories. That is a challenge. But now you can clearly see that people, they don't like to hear dry speeches or conversations. Why do you think people are not really attracted to dry speeches, conversations, or even articles that are dry, scientific, full of words?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know that they're not attracted to words. I think people are. I think we're very
dry words,
to words,
which means like
but if you think of the most inspiring speeches, last weekend I had a friend visiting from Boston, and she hadn't been here to Washington in a long time, so we went down to the National Mall and all of the museums there, but also the memorials, so the Jefferson Memorial and the Lincoln Memorial, the founding fathers of the United States. Had very inspiring words to say, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. That was Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It really did mark a turning point in the American Civil War, for example. Not just a battle at Gettysburg and how many people died there, but Lincoln's inspiring words were really what set the nation on a new course and reset people's temperaments from war and separation and division to the reunification of, the division between North and South in the United States. So those words do have a power to inspire us. And when delivered well, of course, in a speech, that can make all the difference. But, for example, Thomas Jefferson, who wrote beautifully, and who wrote the preamble to the U.S. Constitution, and his words on the Jefferson Memorial, I don't know if you've read them and been down there. It's beautiful down there, by the way, in the spring. To read his words are really very applicable to the 21st century. Now, Jefferson, interestingly, who was a prolific writer, was a very timid speaker. He was afraid to speak, and so you know how the President of the United States delivers an address to Congress on the State of the Nation every year? Well, he sent his to Congress. He never delivered it. He had the speech brought to Capitol Hill, and they read it silently to themselves. So even words in print can have that kind of impact when they are
written very well. We're going to talk about the different forms of storytelling, which means what kind of means or methods we can use to channel, to express our stories. I want to talk a little bit about why people have difficulties in terms of listening dry speeches full of data, facts, and so on, and conversations. If I come to somebody else and if I tell him how important it is to do this and that without sharing, for example, my story, how I practiced that, or sharing the stories of other people, how they use this thing and how it works and so on, it doesn't inspire that person. But if I interject stories about that topic, it inspires. And I think one of the reasons we were talking about before the program about how our brain works. Our brain always look for pictures, images. So when we tell stories, it gives the brain image and picture. And that's very easy to our brain to capture that concept and also to inspire us to do whatever is communicated through the story.
Right. Well, there's a phenomenon that is part of human nature, as far as I know. Scientists call this confirmation bias. So I am going to look for facts and figures that confirm what I already believe. That's the bias we all bring to life.
Yes.
So the way I was raised, I believe X, and so I'm going to pick out facts from the world around me that confirm X.
Yeah.
The way you were raised to believe Y, and Y is opposed to X. So you're going to pick out the facts and figures that
supports, confirms.
Y, right? So how can X and Y meet? Well, if we come up with a shared story,
we can bridge the gap.
We can start to bridge the gap, but we can also kind of be open to each other's point of view without feeling that if you tell me Y is right, that I'm wrong. Because we all want to be right.
Yeah.
You know, so
human bias.
If we can find a common ground, then we're both right and we both win.
Yes.
So that's between you and me, but if we can do that in our neighborhoods or communities or families or nations and in the world, how much more powerful could it be to connect all of those different stories together so that we have one common goal that resonates.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you might think of this, you know, I don't know if you've heard stories of the astronauts who have gone into outer space or gone to the moon, and they have this view of the planet Earth from their, you know, their little tiny spaceship that puts into perspective how really small this Earth is.
Compared to the giant universe.
To the universe, which we can't even understand what the universe is. And they suddenly get this inspiration that we are all part of this little blue, shiny blue marble that's unique in the universe. And as far as we know, intelligent life is unique in the universe. You know, that may change in time as we get smarter about finding it, other sources of life or understanding that. But for now, anyway, it's precious, this little blue dot that we share. And so if you can keep that perspective of being of the earth while you're not, you know, while you're on it, as they had when they were not on the planet anymore, then how much more important does it get to be for us to share our stories together and to figure out ways that we can work and make this, the planet that it's really nurturing to all of us.
Yeah, exactly. You know, one of the struggles many community leaders and business owners have is they have great contents, they have great causes, and they have great products and services. The question is, how can you create stories and reach out to people so that they could be able to reach out and get your products, services, support your causes. So it's very important, but it's very hard for some people. It's very hard to tell stories. Why do you think it is very hard for people to share stories, use stories to promote their causes, their businesses, products, and services?
Well, I think at least in the United States, you know, I can't really speak for other countries, but in the United States, we're kind of raised to believe that you don't brag about who you are or what you have to offer. And so people are reticent to promote their product or themselves if they think it's going to make them, put them up as targets, to make them seem like, who are you to say that?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And it's true. If you look at the presidential race in the United States, as it's shaping up, my God, poor Hillary Clinton is going to take potshots from everywhere because she's seen as dominant, because she is a woman who isn't afraid to, or hasn't been afraid to promote her qualifications and her skills and her talents and her experience. And she's going to be torn to smithereens in the process of this race, but she knows that, so she's prepared for it. So anyone who kind of, you know, we even have words for this, don't get off your high horse, we say in English. So, you know, if you're on your high horse, it's easy to take a shot and bring you down.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people are afraid of that.
But you know, yes, I understand. It's also common, you know, in some other cultures. I can tell about the Ethiopian culture where it's kind of taboo when you talk about your stories. You are encouraged to, for example, other people to speak about you, your qualifications, your qualities, and so on. If you speak about your stories, the people think that you are selfish, egotistical, and so on. So that's why many people don't speak about their qualifications, what they do, and so on. They don't share their stories. Other people tell. For that matter, in our culture, you don't find many autobiographies. People don't write about their stories. So I don't think it's productive for me. I don't think personally that it's productive to our community, because we need to know the stories of great people in our community, whether it is from politics, business, religion, science. We want to know their stories. They should share it, but culturally, they are not motivated or they are not incentivized to share their stories. I understand that. But at least right now, I can't push our audience to come out and talk about their stories. They may consider that as bragging or prideful or egotistical. That's up to them. I don't consider that. By the way, I share my stories. I share my qualifications, regardless of whatever people think about that. I share because people have to know what I do. And also at the same time, I know my weaknesses. I know my limitations. So I balance the two. I share my success stories, also share my weaknesses and the stumblings. In that case, I think there is a balance. I'm not saying I'm great, I'm successful, I'm better than somebody else. No, I'm not saying. I'm unique, like everybody is unique, and I want to share my unique stories, and I want to hear the stories of unique people that fill this universe. Mm-hmm. But I don't push that right now. If people are not interested to share their stories, fine. But leaders, especially in our community, they are fighting dictatorship. They are trying to bring people together from, we have like more than 72 ethnic groups in Ethiopia. You can only bring these ethnic groups together and unite them if you find shared stories. There are so many bad things happening in Ethiopia, like killing, jailing, and so on. You can only fight that and bring justice, democracy, and freedom only if you have great shared stories. So leaders, they should share stories. If not about their stories, at least the stories of their community, the stories of their country. But it's a challenge for many people to share stories, partly because it takes a little bit of time, because you have to sit down, reflect, write down, make sense out of it. And we're going to talk about, for example, what kind of methods we should use to share our stories. Do we have different methods to use to share our stories?
This is one story
through media.
Now,
through
right?
media, exactly.
Sure.
You're sharing your story. I'm also sharing. So, of course, this is one method. What about other methods? Other methods we can use to share our stories?
Well, writing, of course.
Writing.
It's very important and is really can have a lasting influence. Whether it's fiction or nonfiction biographies, I think I was surprised to hear you say that people are discouraged to write biographies.
You find rare autobiography. I never read autobiographies of Ethiopians. Sometimes they mix their stories in their book, but it's not like full autobiography. Mm-hmm. So people, there is no rule or there is no law that prevent people, but I don't see many autobiographies. What we know is, for example, some ex-ministers or successful leaders who are retiring, they write about their experiences while they were in power, but they don't share their stories. Because I'm interested in what they have done, but I'm also interested to know their stories, their successes, who they are, what they believe, their values, their failures. I want to learn from their failures. I want to learn from their stumbling, but they're not sharing that. So that's why otherwise people write books in Ethiopia, but the issue is, are they sharing true stories, stories that can inspire me? Maybe they may make them vulnerable, but they may inspire their audience.
Well, I think you've hit on a really important point, is that sharing not just our successes, but our failures, or
our limitations,
or times we've had to bounce back from adversity, because we all do.
Yeah.
We may try to put our best foot forward and say, I won this election and I'm president of this and I speak for that, but we all have setbacks.
We have fears, we have drawbacks, inconsistencies. I have many inconsistencies. I look back and say, how I did this. Sometimes I look back to my inconsistencies. Some of them, they were out of my control. I found them. I embraced them. I'm not embarrassed with them. But the question is, am I willing to share those stories? Am I willing to those failures, drawbacks, inconsistencies or not. But definitely it's a challenge. We have to learn how to weave our stories, both success and failure, both progressive and also stories of stumbling, so that people will have the full picture of who we are. But the challenge is you're not incentivized, because if you share, for example, your weakness or your limitation, people see you as weak or maybe a flawed person and so on. But the truth is nobody is perfect. Nobody is consistent. Nobody is always strong. Nobody is always courageous. For that matter, Mandela, you mentioned him earlier. He said that courage is not the absence of fear. The courageous man is the one who continues to proceed without failing, without stopping, even if he feels or even if he's threatened by fear. So if somebody thinks that, oh, I never experienced fear, oh, I'm always courageous, I'm heroine or hero, and that's really lie, or this is hypocritic.
Well, and people can't relate to you if you don't share those experiences of being afraid.
Yeah.
Because we are human, and I think it's scary for people to open up.
Yeah.
It's really, in our world, it's very hard to share something from your heart, because it
may backfire. People may use it. Yeah.
Or say, "Oh, look at
her. What she has done."
Yeah.
Especially when you become a leader. That's why, when I look to leaders, let's say community leaders, spiritual leaders, and so on, always they portray themselves as hero, never been afraid, never been worried, never made any mistake, and so on. I see that. I don't really feel connected with that person, because I think 99.9% of the people around, whether it is in church, in politics, or in business, they have some forms of fears, doubts, and they have some mistakes they have done they don't want to talk about. So if I am a leader, if I portray myself as perfect, they don't communicate with me and relate with me, because they are afraid that if they share something to me as a leader, I may judge them. I may consider them as flawed or weak or whatever. But let's say if the leader shares his stories of stumble, his stories of failure and limitations, they are encouraged. Oh, he's like us. Oh, she's like us. And they come to us. They share their stories too. Of course, here is what I suggest to people. Maybe it's very difficult to share your stories, especially those stories that make you vulnerable publicly, but you can start to talk your stories with your close friends, inner circles. Test your story. See how people react to that. And of course, once you develop confidence, because when you become very confident, that I read last time a quotation which says that I am full of flaws or something, but I am also full of blessings that I'm grateful or something like that. Mm-hmm. So yes, we have some flaws, but we have also some blessings. Why don't we embrace both? That makes us unique. And story helps us to share who we are, because we can still share some of our vulnerable stories in a very articulate way, so that people could be able to learn from our stories.
Right. Well, and I think there are two things I would say in response to that. One is what we've been talking about here is having the time to really be in story and to not expect some instant 30-second soundbite to come out. Yeah. So if we give ourselves that time and trust, even between you and me, if we have built that trust between us, I'm more likely to reveal something that I'm afraid of, or that I'm worried about, or that's got me stuck, than if we're just meeting and it's, hello, how are you? Great. That's the end of the story. Yeah,
we can't really create any bond of relationship if we are not sharing stories. And I believe that, on top of what we discussed so far, is that we can use oral, written, digital. Right. For example, we can share our stories in the form of blog. We can post it on our websites, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. And also we can use films to share our stories, videos, and so on. We have to use multiple forms of media to share our stories, because people are looking for our stories and our stories.
Music, drawing,
painting.
painting.
My
all of
God.
those things.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you're bringing to mind that I am taking a course in active dreaming.
Wow, active dreaming.
Active dreaming.
What kind of dreaming is that?
Well, some of it is bringing your dreams to a group of people. This is in a private Facebook page where people are sharing their dreams and other people are commenting on them. So we always use the framework of, if this were my dream, I invite you to comment on what I've just shared with you. And you have to say, well, if it were my dream, this is what I would think. So you're not hijacking my dream.
It's just helping me.
It's always going to be my dream, but I would be interested in your interpretation. And a lot of the people in this group, as you might imagine, as we are sharing these dreams, they're also painters and photographers and poets and writers.
Wow.
And so people are sharing poems that come out of their dreams, that they've written as a response to their dreams, or paintings, and they're really imaginative. They're really amazing. And so that's another forum that you could use that you wouldn't necessarily think of. And in this case, it's a private Facebook page, because those are things that you wouldn't want
to the public
the public to know. But dreams are a very good source of stories. And I also wanted to say, and I'm sure this is true in your culture, from Ethiopia and Africa in general, I think we've lost a lot of the culture, the indigenous culture.
Yeah.
That really has a lot of wisdom to share with us today.
Yeah.
And, in the United States, we've certainly lost the Native American culture and those traditions and the oral histories that are involved in that. And I know that Africa is a rich source of Native traditions and customs, indigenous wisdom. And if we had time again, both to share those and develop the trust around our common understanding of them, but also listening, because I think we are always trying to get a word in edgewise in conversation in the 21st century, and very few people are active listeners. And listening is as much a part of the story as talking, because we can't share if we're not listening to other people.
You're right. Listening is very important, but unfortunately many of us, especially leaders, we think that communication is all about talking, so we don't pay attention. Of course, listening not only with our ears but also with our hearts, and by providing our undivided attention. Whenever I meet people who listen, I'm always humbled, because I'm always prompted to speak than to listen. And when I find some people listening to me, these days I'm conscious, so I say, wow, I want to be like him or her. So yes, listening is very critical to storytelling.
And sometimes it's listening to the silence. Like if we have a pause in our conversation, that makes people very uncomfortable. If we were to sit here right now and count out 30 seconds of silence, everybody would want to jump in and fill the gap.
Yeah.
But sometimes what's communicated in silence is just as important as the words. We use.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So let's be a little bit technical here. What is the best format of story? Like there is a format for writing article, writing books. So what is the best format for?
Several hours of conversation.
I know, just in 2 minutes. Can you tell us?
Well, there's what we call a narrative or a story arc.
Yes.
And, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you are concentrating on this idea that the beginning sort of starts slowly and builds up in a curve until it reaches a climax, and that's, sort of here's the dramatic moment in the story, and then it can come back down the other side of the curve to the finale or the conclusion. That's really what we're used to in hearing stories, in oral storytelling, oral traditions, or in a book, or even in a film. If you watch a film and watch how it builds, there are several turning points. There are acts.
Yes.
You have Act 1, and there's something that happens to send the hero into a new part of the story, and then the climax is Act 2. Then it's Act 3 is the denouement, or the conclusion that draws to an end. The best storytellers who have practiced that over and over and over again, and who have that down, can start a story in the middle also, and then bring you back to the beginning and mix the end into it, and you can still follow it. But the most the simplest and most impactful way of telling stories is, start at the beginning, build, come to a climax.
And conclude it.
And then conclude it.
With some actions, some call to actions.
A call to action is good, especially in business. If you want somebody to buy something from you or call you to learn more about what you offer as your service, whatever, go to your website, whatever.
Yeah, because sometimes people share their stories and then they don't let people know what to do next, because your stories has purpose. So at the end, you have to give people some action items, what they should do because of that story.
Right. Well, and you want to summarize too. Here's the important points of what I told you.
Yeah.
Now call me.
Or contact me through this number or go to this website. I go to Toastmasters to improve my communication skill, and one of the things that challenges me, but that helps me to improve my communication, is you'll be given 2 minutes, and it's called table topic. They will throw at you a topic, and then you have to speak. They just gave you. You didn't have time to prepare, and you have to find a story about that topic and share it within 2 minutes. So the format you share, that's what I use. That's what they recommend to you. First, always when you are given a topic, first create an introduction and then have a little bit 1, 2, 3 points and conclude it, and then call to action if you have any call to action. That's great. Let's talk about the benefits. Now, why should people spend time? As you said, it takes time to sit down, reflect, and work on your stories, whether it is a 2 minutes story, 1 minute story, or 20 hours story. You have to sit down and reflect and write down. But for people to pass through this pain and generate stories and use the stories, what are some of the benefits they may enjoy when they use stories?
Well, I think writing down your story in particular helps you understand it better. So I can tell you this story of visiting my mother last week. My mom's 97 years old.
Wow.
So she grew up, she was born in 1918. She grew up in a time before, telephones were new.
Yeah.
Before too many people had cars, you couldn't afford a car. She grew up through the Depression.
Wow.
And so when I go visit her, she lives in Florida now, when I go visit her and she tells me stories of her childhood, it sounds like ancient history to me,
Yeah.
And at the same time, she looks at me with my cell phone, my iPhone, and she's like, what are you doing with that little thing, Robin? Put that down. And it's like two very different cultures.
Yeah.
And of course, we have a common story because, I grew up and listened to her stories growing up, but it just, even within that span of a generation, you can change your story so much. So writing down some of the things, she works in where she lives, they have a memoir writing group. So she writes down these little stories from childhood and these little anecdotes so that I can pass them on to my children someday and they can understand what kind of world she grew up in and how different it is today. So it really helps us understand who we are and where we came from. And maybe if the story is not working, maybe it means you have to change the ending.
Yeah.
And you have the power to do that.
Exactly. But because of the benefits, because whether you are a business owner, to be a successful business owner, you have to have first a very strong story that convinces people to come to you and get your services and your products, because you may have great stories, great contents. If those contents and those products, if they're not articulated well, unless you have stories to tell people why you're doing, why you are in business and what you are dreaming and what you are trying to achieve, you can't really succeed. You may stay with your products, with your great message and content. You can't reach out to your clients.
Well, I would take that one step further. When I talk to clients and I tell them, you can't just tell your story, you have to tell what the benefits are to your customer.
Okay.
So you call it a benefits orientation. So I always write to you. You're my audience. You're the one I want to purchase my service.
So you tell me the benefits I will get out, or I will benefit out of your stories.
And that's something any business owner can do in practice, and it's a really good practice to get into the habit of, because otherwise you're just talking to yourself.
Yeah, and people say, what's in it for me? If there is nothing in it for them, why they should bother about listening you or buy you or hire you? They have to find, as you say, some benefit. So when you articulate your stories, it should be able to relate to your audience or to your clients and customers. What about how can we, now let's talk about some solutions, like how can I improve, how can we improve our storytelling ability?
Well, I think it comes down to practice.
Okay.
So if you are used to using facts and figures in your speech, try relating that to some aspect of your life and really highlighting that, bringing that out when you are meeting one-on-one with a potential client or customer. You know, how did this help you? Maybe I started my business making toothbrushes because I found out that the toothbrushes that were on the market already didn't have a certain aspect of dental hygiene that's important, because in my family we have a problem with gum disease. I don't know. I'm just making this up.
Yeah.
But if you can relate it to something like, I found a solution. Here's a good example. I'm working with an NIH institute right now to talk about pediatric palliative care, which those are a lot of big words, but it's really supportive care for children who have serious illness.
Okay.
And they keep talking about pediatric palliative care. I don't know what that is, but as a parent, I might need it desperately for my child.
Yeah.
So if I can talk about getting services to my child that they deserve because they are suffering from long-term illness, whether it's cancer or some a brain tumor, epilepsy, whatever it is, and there's a lot of services that I deserve and that I can get based on the fact that my family is suffering as a result of this, then I will be much better off than if somebody just tells me, oh, pediatric palliative care, you can get art therapy for your child.
What is that?
What does that mean? Well,
Yeah.
if you bring the story of a child who is suffering from a serious illness,
and how he got healed or something.
How he got here, and how the parents are struggling, and how their siblings are having such a hard time because this child gets all the attention and they're being neglected. I mean, for obvious reasons, but then you can say, well, you can get a social worker to come in and help your family. You can get a homeschool teacher to come in and support your family because your child can't go to school. Or, if you're in the hospital and you need somebody to take care of your children back home, if you're with the sick child who has to be in the hospital, there are support services that can. So that's a whole different story than talking about, oh, you can get home care. Well, what does that mean?
What's home care?
Yeah. So getting this client to understand that telling the story of the sick child is going to resonate so much more with anyone who's a parent or who's been in a family where somebody has suffered from an illness. You have the right to get these services, and they exist, and they're there for you. But if you don't know that, and you're just given a lot of blah, blah, blah,
it doesn't help.
It's not going to help. So getting them to tell that story, and through the mouth or the eyes of a mother or a child who's going through this experience, is so much more powerful.
So if I'm going to share my story, let's say, to a particular audience, first I have to understand my audience, and then find a story that may resonate to that audience, and I have to sit down, write it down, and then finally find ways to show them that this story is their stories. They can own it. They may benefit out of this story, and then give them a call to action. And of course, as you said, practice it. You cannot just go out there and be successful storyteller. You have to practice, go to some meetings, practice like Toastmasters and other organizations that may provide you the opportunity to go out there, practice on your friends, colleagues, and then you improve it, because you can't become a great storyteller overnight.
Right. And also, it's great if you have friends who will listen to your story and give you feedback. Sometimes you need to go to a wider audience, specially made of the people you're trying to reach, and that way sometimes you have to do a survey or some kind of questionnaire to get feedback. Does this resonate with you? How could I improve it? What would be better? What do you need to hear from me that I'm not saying that I can use to help you? And it's always, I can help you by doing X, Y or Z.
Yeah, I can tell you, I have many mentors. One of my mentors, where I give trainings. So one of the organizations that I give training to its mid-level managers is NIH. Like you, I work as a subcontractor trainer, and I have a mentor. So he always gives me some feedbacks on how to improve my presentation. So I am learning every time how to improve my story. For example, rather than focusing on the positive side of myself, why don't I share stories that I stumbled? Let's say I was talking about time management. Rather than talking about how I come always on time, what about my story of stumbling, the time I didn't come on time, and what happened, what kind of pressures I felt, how it was embarrassing, and so on. So having a mentor, and also having people who provide you feedback is a great thing, because sometimes you are sharing stories, but your stories may be always bragging about yourself. Maybe your stories don't resonate to the people you are trying to connect. So if there are mentors bold enough to correct you or give you direction, that's the best way to improve your storytelling. So let's talk about how can we use stories? In the world, in Ethiopia right now, many people are saddened by the Islamic status, slaughtering around 30 compatriots, shooting at the head, shooting and slaughtering them. And it's very saddening. And also around the world, we see that there are many ills. Go to wherever, China, Russia, everywhere there are pressures, repressions, and so on and so forth. How can we use stories to inspire people, to inspire to take action, to heal their sorrow, to heal their frustrations, motivate them, and encourage them to be who they are? How can we use stories for these kind of things?
Well, we were talking before the show about this thinker, philosopher, a guy named Charles Eisenstein, and he has this idea that I think is very valid, that we've lived in a world where you and I are in competition for a few resources. It's a limited amount that's at the top, and you and I both want it, so we're going to fight for that. And instead of thinking of that, he calls that the story of separation. And it's breaking down all over. As you say, ISIS is a fine example of that. They're coming in and disrupting everything. It's very... it's evil in a way, but it's there, and we have to acknowledge that it's there, and it's not going away easily unless those people get to be heard and appreciated and understood in whatever way they feel that they're trying to disrupt. But the age of separation pits you and me against each other, and this Charles Eisenstein has written the story, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, which is a great title. Yeah. But it's really about moving towards an age that he calls interbeing, which is, he picked up that phrase from Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a Buddhist monk and a very prominent leader. And so the world of interbeing, or the story of interbeing, is really about cooperation. Like, you win, I win, we all win. And how do we get from this world where we're in competition to a world where we're together and we're in support of each other for the common good? It's not an obvious path because we've never done that before. At least in recorded human history, that hasn't been true.
We are competing, fighting, showing the difference we have. Rather than rallying towards our commonality, we always find and magnify our differences.
Yeah. So Charles Eisenstein calls this the space between stories, where the old story is breaking down, separation. The new story, interbeing, hasn't really come into being yet. And we're trying to figure out how we get from here to there.
So we are in between
without killing each other in the process. And so in this interbeing space, it is really about the time and the intention to hear each other out, to hear our stories in common. You listen, I talk, I listen, you talk, and finding what we have in common in terms of, what our hearts know we want in life. And our hearts want everyone. This is true, I believe, of everyone, unless you're a sociopath, perhaps, that we want to be heard, we want to be loved, we want to be held in respect and compassion, and we want our families to thrive. And so that's everyone.
Yeah, but right now, in the world, if you go to Ethiopia, for example, if you say, I don't like this policy, for this reason, you will go to jail maybe for 18 years. Just you say this policy is not right. I think the right policy to our country, to our future, the future generation is this. Why, don't they listen? If they just listen, we won't have that, right now, the government is jailing. I don't think that they will have enough space to jail everybody who is dissenting. So, right now in the world, people are desperately looking to share their stories. And what's sad is that there are dictators who want to muzzle, want to keep people quiet. And I agree with the Islamic State. I know that they are using violence. They should be contained by force. I understand that because they should not kill. They should not attack innocent people. They should be contained. Power is important to stop them. But I believe that the long-term solution is not always use force. As you say, they should be allowed to express their stories, what they want from the world. Do they want to change the world? Let them use leadership. Let them use stories. Let them use free and non-violent way of changing the world. Present their case. If people believe that, let's go for it. If people don't believe that, don't use guns, don't use knives.
Well, of course, it's been the traditional way we keep power.
Yeah, but that should change.
But that is changing. I believe it is changing very slowly, though, because the people who have power are not willing to give it up very easily.
Yeah.
They want to stay at the top, and they want the money and the fame and the glory that comes with that.
But they're going to lose it because, as you said, things are changing. Right. They can muzzle their people forever. They can kill 7 billion people, and you can achieve your success by muzzling people. I can see, it's very easy. Let's say the Ethiopian government, why they are scared for people to discuss about the policies of the government, to discuss about the problem of the country, to discuss about the future, the dream, how can we become together? Just because people are sitting and talking about their stories, it makes them mad. They want to kill, they want to jail. They are just creating they are just digging their own graves because the world won't stop sharing stories. The world, humanity, we are wired that way. We want to speak. We have this freedom. Some people say, don't talk about the government or be against them. What do you want me to do? Keep quiet. Hey, that means for me is I'm dead. I'm dead. So I don't want to be, dead. I want to share my stories regardless of the consequences of sharing that stories. The middle ground is let, the government share its story. We will share our stories. Whichever story wins, the people accept it. Peacefully, we can move forward by working together, sharing our stories, finding common ground. That is the way. The way is not that muzzling the whole population and think that you can be in power, get corrupted, be in power, and remain there forever. You can't do that.
Well, I think what you're hitting on is really characteristic of how technology is changing the storytelling. So the old story is that the government or a big corporation who wants to sell you their products, or a teacher, or your parent, even.
Or your leader, your preacher.
Or your preacher, that's right. Well, it's top-down communication. I say it, it must be true, you do what I say. That's the old way, and it's very much like a parent and a child relationship.
Exactly.
But it extends at all levels of society, and what's changing is now we have these tools like Twitter, that's what started the whole revolution in Egypt and what sustained that.
Yes.
So Twitter is in the hands of people, and people can tell their story and gather others together around that story. And it's not the one the government is telling you must believe because we say it's true. It's that people are saying, well, I don't think that's true because my family is suffering. I don't have a job. I can't get work. And this person over here who they've never met before is saying the same thing. And suddenly they find each other, and there's power because they have now two people who are sharing the same story. And then they reach out, and the third person comes together. And so now that you have a whole mass of people telling that story and saying, look, I'm in this too. I'm just like you. So that's how it's changing. This top-down communication is breaking apart. That's part of this story of separation it's breaking up. It's breaking up before our eyes. And now it's coming from all directions. It's more of the grassroots movement has more power than it ever did before because of these tools of communication. And as long as you keep holding to the idea that there are others out there who believe what I believe, I'm not going to accept what the government has to say, no matter how hard they come down on me. It takes a lot of courage to show up and do that every day. And we may not have the answer.
Exactly.
You know, even the 300 people in Tahrir Square, or the 3,000 people, or whatever it was, they didn't have the answer, but they just knew the old way wasn't working, and that something had to change. It turned out that the something that had to change, they weren't ready to assume what the new story was going to be, because no one had thought that far ahead.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem, is once things break down, you have to be ready with something new that can
and
grow
find
up
a story that help you move forward.
It's chaos, you know. Otherwise you have a failed state. And that's what's happening in Yemen and Sudan and so many countries around the world. But if the old story isn't working, people have the power now in their own hands. You know, in your iPhone or my iPhone, you have the power to really reach out to a whole world.
With new stories that can inspire especially the new generation to see the future and be motivated to be part of the incumbent, you know, leaders. There are leaders everywhere in every industry, but the new generation and the contemporary generation leaders, they should come together, create that shared vision, use a story to explain the vision and so on. So storytelling is one of the methods that we should use to change the world for good.
My kids are in their 20s. I have 3 kids. They're now all in their 20s. They don't read the newspaper. Like I grew up, everybody had to read the newspaper
every morning you get up and your newsletter.
That's right, on a piece of paper, not in a tablet. And they don't, but they still get the news. It's just that they don't believe necessarily that the news that the Washington Post provides is the only version of the news. There are a lot of other voices that are telling the story from different ways. You know, that might still be the official way. But there are lots of other voices coming through, and who's to say that they don't have it right?
Exactly. Yeah. I enjoyed our discussion. You have shared so many stories. I appreciate for you coming here. On behalf of our audience and also Isa, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Dear our audience, I hope you enjoyed our discussion. We talked about the power of storytelling. You could be a business owner, professional, or a community leader. We talked about how you can use stories to inspire, stories to promote your cause, stories to clarify your brand. And also we talked about how we can create a story that can inspire everyone to give us a bright future into the coming years and decades ahead. And we talked about how we can create stories, how can we tell them artfully. Hope you gain something out of this, and this is my belief that you're going to start sharing your stories. Start with your friends, your families, your mentors, and then take it to the next level. If you are a leader, well, use the stories to promote your cause, to bring diverse people by creating shared stories. Until I see you next time, have a wonderful time. Thank you very much for watching.